My name is Jessie Ace. I'm part of a group of enabled warriors that you've probably never heard of. We're fighting back against our invisible illness and taking the dis out of disability. We don't give sympathy to our symptoms. They enable us to be the warrior that we are. If you ask doctors and nurses, they'd say what we're doing is impossible. But pushing the limits of our conditions is something that we have to break through every single day. So we push the limits. We are mentally strong. We can do anything. The question is, how far can we push those limits? This podcast will give you the answers. I'm Jessie Ace, and this is the Disabled to Enabled podcast. Today on the show, we have the extraordinary pleasure of chatting to the one and only director of the National MS Society of America, Mr. Mark Saratoni. Thank you so much for being with us here today, Mark. It's amazing. Mark is the guy that gives the face to the cause, and today we will find out more about the brand of the National MS Society and how it was created.
Great. Yeah, great to be here.
Brilliant. So let's start us off with tell us something about yourself that people might not know, Mark.
So people that know me, they know me as the creative director. So I do graphic design, I do filmmaking, and I work with photography and stuff. But I actually went to school for music, actually. So I went to the University of Denver and I majored in music, specifically drum performance and jazz. So drummer, I play in a couple of local bands here in Denver, and I used to do it professionally for a living, and that's actually what brought me to graphic design, actually, because when I was in the band in the 90s and we were touring, and this is before the internet really, and social media, the way that you promoted your band is you put up posters and mailers and you made CD artwork, and so someone had to do that in the band. So that position sort of fell to me. And so that's sort of what brought me to graphic design, ironically enough. So, but yeah, I still play in a couple bands.
Cool. That's really weird as well, because we've actually got a similar kind of story in that respect, because my husband was in bands and things, and he always got me to make his posters and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So I fell into it like that too, which is so strange. Yeah, cool. So the National MS Society was founded in 1946 by Sylvia Laurie, and it's changed a lot since 1946. So can you tell us how and when you kind of became the Director of Creative Services, Marketing and Development at the National MS Society? Yeah,
so I actually started working here in 2006.
Okay.
So this will be my 13th year. I'm sort of like a part of the old guard here. So yeah, so I worked at a different company, not in healthcare. This is actually the first nonprofit I've ever worked for. And I worked with a woman at a different company, and that company folded. And I went to one company, and she came here. Okay. And she started working here, and she reached out to me to get some freelance work done. So she started telling me about what she was doing here, what working here was like, and it sounded really great. And it was better than what I was doing, because I was just sort of stuck in this terrible gray cubicle office, wearing a tie every day. I'm like, there's just something not right about this. Isn't really me. So I came here, and they were in the midst of rebranding the society. Perfect. And so they were working with a really big international agency called Wyden and Kennedy, and they have done a lot of big work. So they developed the Nike logo, Starbucks, they worked with Apple a lot. They did a lot of big stuff. And it turns out that Dan Wyden, one of the partners in the agency, his daughter has progressive MS, and so that's their connection to the cause. Mm-hmm. And so we worked with them on a full rebrand of the society, which really meant rebranding the logo, the brand positioning, just the whole thing. We used to have this just generic logo that sort of looked like a combination of the Swiss Army knife logo and heart or something. So it's just different. So we needed something new. We needed to figure out. And what we started developing with them was the fact that really what we needed to do was sort of inspire people to create a movement of people against MS. And so we needed a logo that really represented that. And so where we landed was literally just, I mean, it is just the MS with just a big, strike through it, and we worked on which different, strike through gesture was right. And so we started working through that brand positioning. And so even though we wanted to have the logo basically represent, that we are a movement of people against MS and have it clearly show that, we also needed to have more nuance in the advertising campaign. And so something that a lot of cause brands do is, like, for instance, when you watch late night TV, or something, and you see, the poor African children, and, there are all these different ways to sort of represent your constituents. And most of really what people are doing out there is creating sympathy for their constituents, but the problem is that it tends to look, especially in our world, it tends to make people look too much like a victim. See, that's not real what we're really going for. And when we started developing the brand, we interviewed people with MS and we spoke with them a lot, and they're like, we don't want to feel like victims. We want to feel powerful. Because that's the thing that MS takes away from us, is that it takes away our power. And so what we decided to do is in our advertising and in our brand to show people in the desired state of what we were going for, which is sort of showing people looking powerful, looking like they're living their best life. Now, that does not mean, though, that we're trying to paint this overly optimistic, positive view of MS. We want to hit people with the reality of what it's like and be very transparent and very blunt about that, but that we have hope and optimism for the future. So that's really the core part of our brand. And that's also what differentiates us from so many other brands. It's funny, in the 12 or 13 years I've worked here, I've seen a lot of other cause agencies starting to sort of use that model of empowerment, which I actually think is great, because I think it's
all for that. Really am.
Yeah. And so that's really the sort of background on our brand.
That's amazing. So that's how you became the creative director at the NMSS.
Yes.
I always try and hyphenate that. Sorry, not hyphenate, but shorten it down to N. And I always forget the letters. I always forget the way around.
I try to just say the society, just because it's a little bit faster. But of course, it depends what context, because people are like, what society are you talking about? Are you talking about society in general? Like, what does that mean? Yes, National Multiple Sclerosis Society.
It's quite a mouthful, isn't it?
It's quite a mouthful. So, yes.
Okay, so from now on, we'll just say the society. It'll be a lot easier. Okay, so you started to tell us about the society's brand at the moment. So how did you end up with the brand positioning that you have, and how is it different from other health cause brands? I know we've kind of gone into how you've gone more down the empowerment route rather than the kind of victim route, if you like.
Yeah.
How do you kind of, really kind of cement that in your brand?
Yeah. So what we like to do is, we also decided back then that, I remember, it's sort of interesting. I remember them showing us comps of the first print ads.
Okay.
And it all used stock photography. And we were like, you know what? That doesn't work. That's not cool. We want to actually photograph real people with MS. I mean, for me, it actually felt like a given. I was a litto bit surprised. And they were like, oh, well, okay. How would you do that? And we're like, well, we need to find the right people and make it feel, we need to have people with different ethnicities and different genders and different, because that's the one thing about MS is, it's basically no one has the same MS. No. MS is different for everyone.
It's the strangest illness, I think, ever.
Yeah. And that's another challenge when you're trying to create awareness about the disease, is that it never looks the same. So that's an extra challenge, And so that was one thing that we really set in stone, though. We're we will always use authentic people with MS and really try to raise their voice, use quotes from of them, because it's really their voice that we're trying to amplify, especially it comes to awareness.
Yeah.
So we started using authentic people, and, you know, and of course, you know, and from an art director standpoint, like when I'm art directing photo shoots or video shoots, you know, part of the challenge is, you know, so many people that I work with, you know, some people have, like you know, if I were to meet you, I wouldn't know that you had MS. That's sort of the invisible thing that we've talked
Yeah.
about, that so many people talk about.
Yeah.
Whereas other people, you know that something's going on with them
Yeah.
because they're either in a wheelchair, they could be quadriplegic, they use a cane, they use a walker, they use these different mobility devices. And so you are aware that something is going on with them,
exactly.
you know? And so like, for instance, like, so the first shoot that we did, I really realized how difficult to actually execute some of these things were going to be, because I'm trying to make these people look powerful, you know? And it's like, this woman was in a scooter, and she had her daughter with her. And she was this beautiful African-American woman. And so we're trying to figure out how to get the shot to, like, cause, you know, like everyone says, you know, a picture says 1,000 words.
Absolutely.
So, like, really, if you can nail the photograph, then really the ad doesn't really have to say a whole lot, and that actually works better. Like, I'm a less is more type of person, you know, where I want to use less text. I want to have like almost nothing be on the ad and just have the photograph sort of say most of what you needed to say.
Yeah.
And so, but you know how it is, like, you know, like, you know, like how many times have you tried to like make a photograph work and it sort of isn't working? Like, I have the young daughter who's like 8 or 9 with her, and she's sort of standing next to her mom, and then it isn't, and then that's a little weird because it just doesn't really match up, and nothing's working.
Yeah.
And so I finally was like, how can we get this idea that, you know, this woman has MS and she's in a scooter, but she's still the mom of the family. She's still the matriarch. She's still in control. She's still able to do this. And we basically figured out that I was like, can you just get on the scooter with your mom and like just have you guys motor like away from us? And that ended up being the image, because that in itself, just that realization of having this daughter actually get onto the scooter and the mom is like motoring away from us, you know, with this good, like that is what, and it was like sort of like an epiphany, whereas like getting this shot to work, that really said it all. And that like said everything, because it was like, it put the person with MS in a position of power, and that they're still living their best life just in the actual choreography, if you will, of this shot. So that was when we started to learn how to like convey our brand through art directing photography. So
nice. No, that's
was
amazing. Yeah. And I think there's nothing better than using actual people with MS. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
like,
I actually can't think of it in a different way anymore, because it just comes so natural, you know, to me. Is like, I would never think of using stock. Now, sometimes we use stock like in our magazine, sort of like we use illustration. I know we'll talk about that, but sometimes we have to, like, I don't need to go out and get, if I need a picture of salt, I'm not going to go out and shoot a photograph of salt. I can get a picture of salt easily, you know, and have it look good. But yeah, when it comes to the people, authenticity is very important.
Absolutely. And I think the story, bringing in their stories as well, is also very important, because
absolutely,
like MS is different, and everybody has a different experience of it. So, you know, it's very, very important. So we like to ask deep questions here at Enabled Warriors. And what do you think is the best design medium for putting a non-profit's message across, and why? Yeah,
I think it's changed a lot. You know, like when I first started to work here, we were still very focused on print, you know. I mean, we really, you know, we wanted to really push our print ads in magazines, and we wanted to make billboards for awareness. You know, like education is a little bit different, but we have to consider all of the things, you know, and we used to print a lot of educational materials and push it out. And of course, it becomes basically the challenge of physical media. Like we're just moving away from actual physical media, you know, as everyone knows. And so, you know, but we're really focused on storytelling. And so storytelling is so important. You know, it's important. And it's actually important in all the things that we need to do. You know, it's important in advocacy, you know, like when we work with the government and try to make legislation for people with disabilities or create funding so that MS research can continue and really get, you know, we have to tell people stories to be able to compel and inspire them. You know, we've also weaved storytelling into education. Like if people need to know more about how to manage their symptoms, we find that story is everything. You know, I mean, we used to just have these experts come on and it would just be talking head and they're like sort of talking at you, you know, and I'm like, this is just all wrong. This needs to be the opposite, where it's a person with MS explaining, you know, like how they sort of met the challenge of a specific symptom, either through therapy or either through learning or physical therapy or any of these different things about how to manage that symptom. And we found that that was way more interesting to watch for one thing. So, you know, but storytelling is really important. And, you know, of course, and probably the most powerful medium for storytelling is video. I mean, there's just really no way around it. Like it just is, you know. Now that's not to say that we can't tell really great stories with
Mark, can you still hear me?
Right in my heart, you know.
There
So,
we go.
you know, that is great, but there's nothing like making a film, you know, and telling a story through film, and that is just, it's
very, very powerful.
arguably our most powerful art form.
Definitely.
For telling stories, you know. And like once the music starts to kick in,
yes.
beautiful light, and you really start, it just really starts to happen. And so that's when we try to tell stories too. I'm thinking about it from a filmmaker standpoint. You know, how am I going to you know, what's the story arc? Like, where am I going to end up?
Yeah.
You know, and am I going to start sort of low and end high? You know, and if so, what's that arc? How am I going to introduce the character? How am I going to introduce, you know, I mean, of course, these are all authentic stories, but the way you construct them is very, very important.
Absolutely.
You know, I need to introduce the character or characters. I need to introduce conflict. What's the challenge? What are we trying to overcome? And how do we get there? You know, and because everyone, like, it's like storytelling is just ingrained in everything that we do as human beings. I mean, it's funny because people are like, what, you know, like especially like in commercial work, like you see so many ads, you know, commercials that are just little tiny micro condensed stories. And that's sort of what makes you watch till the end, you know. The other thing is that, you know, like people are making shorter and shorter and shorter films because, you know, you say now it's like the latest thing is like, well, you have about a minute and a half really for someone's attention. You know how it is when you're swiping through. So it can be very, very, it can be challenging, you know, to try to get that attention, to get people to watch a story from start to end and really get the point and get the full message. But I think you just have to make it as compelling as possible, you know, and if you continue to tell, you know, stories that inspire and that compel people to take an action, that's really what it is. So I would say for me, filmmaking, I think, is the strongest design medium.
That's the winner. That's the winner. That's awesome. So as you know, I'm an illustrator. So I use a lot of like drawings and imagery. I've not quite got into animation yet, but it's something that I do want to have a bit of a go at.
Sure.
So tell us about how and when you use illustration and kind of photography, and kind of how do you know which one to use and when?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say that whenever possible, so we have a magazine, for example, and we have a quarterly magazine that goes out to about 550,000 people in the United States. So it's a big magazine, it's 74 pages. And so it's a lifestyle magazine about living with MS and how to live your best life, basically. So we tell stories of people, we give advice, we have, you know, there's educational, there's a lot of content that people have told us is very, very useful to them. And so, but, you know, we tackle pretty tough subjects sometimes, you know, like we tackle depression, you know. We also tackle a lot of like symptoms, like, so for example, like we like to use illustration when we're talking about things that we don't really want to see photography of. Like, you know, we did a big issue about bladder and bowel. And
Yeah.
so we were like, what are we going to use for the cover? And I'm like, well, we should definitely go with an illustration here because no one wants
to
the
be the
face of
face.
that with an authentic person. You know, like when I go out and shoot photography, lifestyle photography,
Yeah.
you know, they're like, well, how is this going to be used? You know, and I'm like, well, it can show up anywhere, you know, it's really just for general use, you know, in the specific, but it's like at the same time, they didn't sign up being the poster child for bladder and bowel issues. So I have to be,
Yeah.
and also the other thing that we use it for is that sometimes illustration is so much better to use because of the things we were just talking about, which is the disease isn't the same for anyone.
Exactly.
So it's like, you know, for example, if I show a Caucasian woman who's in her 50s, that's very specific. That doesn't speak to the entire population of like perhaps a teenager with MS, a man, you know, I mean, we have to, and that's where I think illustration tends to excel, is through situations where a photograph doesn't do the job because it doesn't just sort of speak to everyone. And also like embarrassing, like for instance, like I looked at a lot of your illustrations and they're wonderful. And I think the one that really hit me the most was something that so many people have told me, which is they pull up in a handicapped parking space and they get out and they are having a good day, for example, and they walk into the store and people are like, what's going on there? Like, you know, that person looks fine. You know, how, and you know, they don't understand why you have, and of course it's so difficult to explain too. You're like, well, you know, I actually have MS, you know, and I you know, I'm having a good day today. Like you know, but I've had really bad days where I can actually barely get out of my car. So, but it's very difficult for people to understand that. And inconsistency.
Definitely.
And I love the illustration that you had where you have this person who's looking sort of awkward and embarrassed, and there's a mother and a child who are like looking to front at her. Like it says everything that you needed to say. Trying to construct a photograph like that would literally be impossible. Like it would never happen. You know? So that's where I really think illustration excels, is in really defining situations that photography just cannot nail. So I think it's really important medium, and we use it so much in our magazine, you know, so yeah.
No, it's good. It's good. I think the number one kind of thing that I keep getting asked for is the version of what I call the inside outside image. So it's kind of a picture of basically what they look like on the outside versus what they look like on the inside.
Right.
You can see all the nerves firing. You can see like weights pulling them down. You can, you know, and I think it speaks to quite a lot of people doing it that way.
And that's something that photography you just can't do that in photography. And so, and also, you know, I mean, that's why I think illustration is used so much in magazines and in print, because it just is able to quickly convey a concept that can't be done with photography, and it just excels at that. So I love seeing brilliant illustration used because it's really the fastest way to get across your point in many situations. So it excels in that.
Very true. It's very true. So what's it like? What is a day in the life of a creative director like?
Well, you know, like a creative director in an agency is different. Like you're usually heading up a firm and working with, you know, your biggest clients and really high level stuff. And so it's a little bit different here. One, it's nonprofit. So I have a very small team. It's really just me and a graphic designer. And we have like some production designers, but I'm mostly concentrated on the big campaign type of stuff. So as well as, you know, I have a print designer, and she designs like interfaces and works on the high level look and feel of like our big campaigns, layout, all that type of stuff. And I'm focused more on storytelling and filmmaking and photography for our specific campaigns. We have a lot of campaigns here. So like, you know, we have our fundraising campaigns. So like we have walk events, we have bike events, we have a mud event called Muckfest. We have hike events, you know, to be able to raise money and then we have all the sort of different campaign stuff we do. So we have like awareness campaigns. where we're trying to, we have MS Awareness Week in the United States, which is in March. We just had that a little while ago. So I work on all of our sort of different campaigns, research, advocacy, fundraising. And so that's what I love about my job is that I have to put on a lot of different hats, like sometimes I'm like art directing a photo shoot, or I'm shooting film, or I'm sitting at the editor and just editing films, putting them together, making little snippets for social media, figuring out, so it's very, the work is varied. And that's what keeps it interesting. That's what I really like about it, is that I'm not just doing one thing. I can work in all these different sort of topical functional areas, and on I can touch print, and I can touch photography, and I can touch video, and that keeps it fresh. So that's what's kept me here for so long.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I imagine that it is a very busy, kind of hectic job at times.
It is.
It's quite a lot of pressure having the kind of, you are responsible for like the face of a whole
it's
kind of movement.
it is, and I feel like the biggest challenge is that I wish I had like an army of people like the whole time, but it's like we're nonprofit, we have limited resources. So, you want to do it all, but you really have to be focused on like, well, what's going to have the most impact? But that's what keeps me here, is that I don't think I could ever go back to like the private sector, because I have impact with my work. Our work impacts the lives of people. And like, that's so important to me. It makes it really, it brings a real focus to the work, because we're really trying to basically change the world for people with MS. Yeah. So worldwide. And so it's like, we're really trying to work at that. And so we have to choose what we think are what are the most important things that we can do to have impact. And then we just want to like nail that stuff. Like we just want to go out there. But yeah, I wish that I had like an army of people like doing all this stuff, because then we could really like ramp it up. But we have to choose what we do. But it feels great that it all has impact to me, I think, is the best thing about it.
Oh, that's good. That's so good. That's so good. So how do you feel about the way that, okay, and this is quite going a little bit off topic, a little bit off the design thing, but I think it's a really, really important question. So how do you feel about the way that disability is viewed by the general public, and what do you think we can do to change those perceptions?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. There's some really interesting people with MS who have done a lot of work in this area. Like this woman that I know, she was an artist with MS. She still continues to be an artist, but she's quadriplegic. And so she helps use other people, and she makes this amazing art, but she's also very interested in the human connection of people. So she often does these little social experiments that are really interesting, where she's making her disability out front with people. Like, I've seen a lot of people do really interesting stuff this way, where like she will go into a Starbucks or something and she'll drop something and she'll have it all being filmed, and to see who comes up and helps her, or if anybody helps her, she also did some interesting stuff with children, about like, what are how do they interpret people with disabilities? Like, are they afraid? Are they interested? And I just think it's really interesting because, when she does these experiments, and like this little girl was afraid to like talk with her. So she has a person that helps her a lot, that's often with her, because she's quadriplegic. And so like so many people have said stuff like this, where like a stranger or a person that doesn't know her will be talking to the other person.
I hear that a lot,
instead, and refer to them in the third person. Like, well, what does she want? And of course the person will be gracious, and say, you can ask her, like, respond to you, like, and so things that we sort of take for granted, if we're not disabled, we take a lot of stuff for granted, I think is what I would say, like how easy. And so I think that's another thing, like with in stories, trying to put people in the position of what it would be like to experience these things, like, in the 90s, they passed the American Disabilities Act here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that made it so that every, store and every, it had to be accessible for people, and made a lot of stuff that was never accessible way more accessible for people. I mean, there's still a lot of work to be done in that area, but
definitely.
But just what it would be like, like I've seen guys, men and women in scooters just going straight up, just going right on the road, like riding like on the side of the road because they can't go on the sidewalk because there's no curb cuts, stuff just that we just take for granted. And I think that being able to make people realize what it would be like to have to do that all the time, and MS has its own challenges too, I mean, it's just, people deal with fatigue like so much. So it's like just to drive to the store, get out of your car, get 4 or 5 items in the store, get back in your car and drive home is like an epic adventure that takes all your might to be able to do that. And I think that's something that I think we want to try to bring more awareness about, what it would be like to do that, but it's very interesting. I mean, the perception towards disability, people have physical disability that you can see, but it's funny because so many people are like, people won't even talk to me. I'm not even there. Like I'm invisible. And that would be really, really difficult to deal with. Just because I use a wheelchair or a scooter doesn't mean that I am not valuable to society. Like I have a lot to contribute, So it's interesting how people deal with it. I can't really speak of what it's like in the UK or in Europe, but I imagine it's similar, that people have similar stories. What do you think about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's especially difficult for people who have an invisible disability, I think. And because we are people forget, and people just treat us like we're just normal people. We're obviously faking it or whatever, because they can't see it and they can't see what's happening on the inside. And I think the word itself, disabled, is just the wrong word to use, because I think disabled is lack of ability. I mean, I don't think we have a lack of ability. I think we have just a different way of being able.
That's a great point.
So
it's just built into that word. Are assumptions just built into not able, that's actually very interesting. Maybe we need to come up with a new word that we are comfortable with to describe that. That's very interesting. Because words mean a lot, like words, there's so much,
and it goes beyond the word as well, because it's a label. It becomes a label.
That's right.
You get MS, you have a disability permit, and you have a disability this, and
that's a great point.
I'm creating a little movement, actually. So rather than being disabled, creating the movement of enabled warriors. We are not disabled warriors. We are enabled warriors, and we can do anything.
I love that.
So that's what we're creating over here in England.
Enabled, to show your power. You have power.
Absolutely, and that's the thing. Like different abilities, if you like, that we all have is kind of like our superpower, because we have to be creative in the way that we do certain things that most people don't understand. And we have things that we're actually really grateful for, and we're grateful for a lot more things, I think. I think that's one thing that you do gain when you're diagnosed with MS. You are grateful for a lot of different things. So.
People have told me that so many times that, it's funny because I have so much reverence for people with MS, because I've had so many people tell me, that MS, now this isn't the case for everyone. I don't want to speak, but people have told me that MS was a blessing to them. And that they literally were like, I'm so glad that actually this happened to me. And of course you hear that, you're just like, wow, really?
Why?
And I have so much reverence for it, because it's so powerful for people to say things like that, where they're just like, like this one guy, he's quadriplegic, but he's extremely independent, and he's actually British, and he lives in New Jersey. And I remember going to his home, and he lives alone, and he's able to control his entire house through technology that he has.
Amazing.
Like, he literally can control everything. He has this person come in and help him in the morning and help him at night. But he's like, once I'm good to go in the morning, I'm good to go. And he'll go out of his house. He'll go to the train. He'll go take classes at Princeton. He like meets with people. He's just fearless. Like, he has no fear. And I'm like, man, you just have such a great way. And he's like, I literally wake up every single day and I am so happy to be alive and to do all the things that I could do. And I'm so inspired by these people. They're just amazing.
Incredible.
I just love that guy's attitude, because he's like, I have nothing to lose, man. He's like, I can go out and I can do all these great things. And I think it was just like what you were saying. He is not disabled. He's enabled. Like, he is literally making the best of what he has, and so sharp, and like talking with him is just great. And so, he talks a lot about disability and how he's perceived and how he's able to overcome that perception, because he's a brilliant person, and speaking with him is just so much fun. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
that's amazing, because that's the biggest thing that I found going in these sort of all these MS groups on Facebook and things, these support groups. The number one thing that really gets to me is the fact that they all say, I can't do this, I've got MS. I can't do that, I've got MS. And there are people out there with no arms, no legs, nothing, running marathons and just being absolute superstars. And I'm like, well, why? Why can you not do it? If this person can do it who hasn't got any arms and legs and they're running a marathon, like, how can you not go and do surfing or whatever?
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I think
it annoys me. So.
Yeah, I think it's all attitude. It's like what attitude you have, and it doesn't mean that you have to go, run a marathon or do any of these other things. You have to find your thing.
You have to
find
your
thing that is what you love, because if you can find that, and if you can modify what you're doing to be able to still do that in some way, then that's where it is, because that everyone has their thing. I often imagine what it'd be like. So like, I'm an outdoorsy person too. Like, I love mountain biking and cycling and snowboarding and climbing, and I love these things. And I always imagine, what it would be like, if those things were taken away from me. What would I still have? What would I still be able to do? How would I do that? And that's why I'm so inspired by seeing people who, they lose their eyesight and they still climb, or they find a way to do these things, or they use the special, like I've seen these hand cycles where they're like, I saw this guy in the trail a couple weeks ago, and he was on basically a 4-wheel mountain bike, and he was just using hand cycle, and this guy ripped past me, man.
That's amazing.
Like, and I was like, oh, so awesome. And I just love seeing people, seeing how they adapt, like my wife teaches snowboarding, and we're always up snowboarding all the time.
Oh, wow.
And I see so many adaptive tools that people can use to keep skiing or keep snowboarding, or use all these different things. And it's just wonderful to see people enjoying the mountain and being out there and like ripping turns too, by the way, and seeing how they've modified to be able to do that. Like, that's amazing. So yeah, but it's attitude. You have to have the attitude. You have to have that resilience to be able to keep going and find that thing that moves you and that drives you. Yeah, it's hard though.
Yeah. But I think the hardest thing is being labelled with this disabled label. I think that is literally the hardest thing. So yeah. Are you ready for some super quick secrets round?
I'm ready. I'm ready for the super quick round. All right. I'll try to be quick. I'm not, I'll try to keep it to like 12 words or like,
So this is part of the show where we find out a little bit more about the personality of our guest with some super quick questions. Okay, so you ready?
I'm ready.
Most inspiring book you've ever read? Go.
Most inspiring book I've ever read was probably Life of Pi. When I read the book, not the movie. The book came out in the 90s. And I loved hearing the story of survival and this kid just making it all the way through. Plus, it's very fantastical. I like that part of it where you're like, I'm not really sure if this happened, but it's interesting. So, yeah, I like that one.
I love that story. That's amazing. Favorite state you visited?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of states in the U.S. They're all different, but I'd like to like broaden it out. When I traveled to New Zealand, that was the most amazing place I've ever been because it had like everything I wanted, like beautiful beaches, massive mountains, beautiful green areas, rural. Like I just loved it there. It was amazing.
Oh, okay. So what is your connection to MS? Like, do you have any?
So I used to play in a band with a guitar player who was diagnosed with MS when we were in the band. And he struggled so much with it and he had to quit the band. Now he still plays some guitar, but like, you know, playing in a touring band is tough. I mean, it's really, really rough business. I mean, it's just like get in the van, you know, and it's like, you know, we used to be like furniture movers too, you know, I mean, we had all this equipment, we had to shuffle in and shuffle out every night, and it's late hours. We had terrible diet. I mean, it just is not conducive to that. But my buddy Jason, I'm still really, really good friends with. He still plays some music, but yeah, it was brilliant. When he was diagnosed and had to quit our band, I was like, wow, I had never really had that much. No one I had ever known so well had been personally affected by MS. Yeah. And then the other one too is that I had my friend's aunt, where we used to go up and stay, and they lived in the mountains, and we used to go stay with them all the time. She had progressive MS, and seeing her challenges and the way that she navigated, you know, this very inaccessible ground, like they, you know, it's just like they live on like the side of a mountain, and so watching her and her husband work together to be able to keep living in this rural area was very inspiring to me.
That's amazing. Gosh, okay. Dog person or cat person?
So I grew up on a horse farm, but I'm a dog person. Although, but my family, we don't have any pets because my wife is allergic to both dogs and cats. So no pets in my house. Yeah, sure. But I used to sort of live like on a zoo because I lived on a horse farm. We had dogs and cats and horses and like all these other animals. So I've had my share in my life, I would say. So.
That's amazing. What is your favorite hobby?
Well, I love being outdoors. I love snowboarding and mountain biking and cycling. And I live in Colorado, and we have beautiful mountains here. I live in Denver. And so that's actually why I moved to Denver, is because I wanted to be close to the mountains. And so my wife and my son, that's like what we live for, is being out in the outdoors. Brilliant.
So where can Enabled Warriors find out more about you and what you do?
Well, I mean, probably just follow me on Instagram. It's Mark_Seratoni. You can find me pretty easily on there. Seratoni's a pretty unique name. So if you spell it right, you'll probably end up with me, and you can see all of our adventures and all of our behind the scenes for our filmmaking that we make here, and photography and all that stuff. I tend to try to push my stuff on that area. So, yep.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put a link to that in the description for you as well. That'd be amazing. So thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been so great to talk to you.
It's been great to talk about this stuff. I really appreciate you inviting me. So thanks so much.
Getting to know more about what you do at the NMS Society. So it's just been fantastic. So you can connect through Mark Enabled Warriors through the I've done it again. NMSS or the Society's website. Oh gosh. And remember, everyone, stay enabled. So thank you so much, Mark. That's amazing.
Thank you.
If you want to fight back against your invisible illness and help take the dis out of disability, then join the tribe on Facebook, facebook.com/enabled warriors. If you love this podcast, click that subscribe button and never miss another episode. And remember, warriors, stay enabled.